Hi, Vaibhav. Thank you for joining us.
Hi Shruti, glad
And
to be over here.
thank you, and congratulations on your admit.
Thank you. It was a really great collaborative work that we did over this. So,
Right. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. So, Vaibhav, please tell us about your profile, your work experience and other things that you are involved in.
sure. Firstly, hi, Vaibhav here. I have had around 4.5 years now of experiences in corporate world. I started my career as a business operations associate at ZS, which is a sales and marketing firm which primarily specializes in pharmaceutical healthcare consulting. So my experience was primarily in terms of commercial excellence analytics, specifically in the incentives and compensation reporting area. And over the years, I made a switch, went to the proper pharmaceutical industry itself by joining Novartis, which is a Switzerland-based pharmaceutical company. And over here, I've been working on various initiatives, be it the analytics, reporting, consultations, or in terms of generation of automation solutions. So I've done like bits and pieces of all the parts of product management to analytics scope. So it has been an amazing journey and learning more about how the industry works, and primarily helping the stakeholders and decision makers make those data driven decisions at the end of the day.
Right. So, please tell us about your decision to, pursue an MBA.
I mean, MBA had always been at the back of my mind, primarily because my experience had been, more in terms of generating some of the key insights, but not in terms of, being in the shoes of someone who makes those decisions at the end of the day. I think from that perspective, MBA made sense. Because I already had a couple of years of experience, and while working in the analytics field, it gave me an introspection into how data drives the decision making process. Over time, I started finding out like what kind of learnings or knowledge or experiences might help me out in making that transition. I realized that post MBA or post a couple of years down the line, I would like to work in the strategy consulting space. So moving into that space is always challenging if you come from a non-business background. And for me, the background was Indian engineering male, which is always a tough demographic to break from into any other industry as such. I decided that yeah, MBA made sense to learn about those core business functions, get an understanding of how business decisions are made, and from that perspective, it made sense. And I decided to pursue this opportunity to go into an MBA journey and learn from my peers at the cohort.
And Vaibhav, you've applied to schools in India as well as schools abroad, and you have a few admits from schools abroad as well. So, how did you compare a program in India versus a program abroad? What were the criteria that were important for you?
Right, so that's a really great question. So it is always tough for Indians to, realize which school might be a good fit for them when applying abroad, because all of us have been ingrained into that mindset, having to go to a CAT route, taking up the common admission test, applying for IIMs, and making a great career out of it. However, I realized a couple of years down the line, after working at ZS and Novartis, that the kind of work MBAs do after going through the IM MBA procedure in India, most of the times they eventually land up into the analytics role or a data science role itself. Even if they might have an initial strategy based role, but they eventually pivot back to the data science or analytics role. And since I was already in that industry and I wanted to explore more in terms of decision making process itself, I figured that if I want to pursue an MBA, I need to, enroll into a program which actually has a lot more experienced professionals, because peer learning is an essential aspect of the MBA journey. And from that perspective, I decided that the programs in India or abroad, which offer that opportunity for me to, explore the program and at the same time learn from my peers who come in with a lot of experience. That is what I was looking for. From that perspective, I applied at Indian School of Business, IIM Ahmedabad, PGPX program, and couple of US based programs such as University of Virginia's Darden and Keenan Flagler. It was a blend of making sure that the post MBA goal which I want to pursue and the kind of environment I want to be in, it both of these played a crucial role in me for deciding which kind of programs do I want to go to.
At the, at certain point in time, what happens is that at a certain GRE score, you'll have, or a GMAT score, you'll have a lot of choices to pick from. So
So
how do you exactly, circle down those two or three schools where you feel like applying in the R1, and then do you schedule some for R2? So what is the thought process behind that?
Right. So I think again, it's a very tough process. It requires a lot of introspection because in those cases, it's not just about, thinking what you want to do and what you want to pursue at the end of the day. It's also about being realistic about your choices. Because a lot of times we feel that, okay, maybe if we, go a peg above our capability, then maybe we'll be able to land those opportunities and so on. That's a general mindset of being optimistic. However, it is important to understand that while being optimistic, we also need to be a bit of realistic at the same time. So what I did was I tried to break down my target schools by understanding what kind of GRE scores, or I mean, I took GRE, so it made sense for me to analyze the GRE scores. What kind of averages do they have across their program in terms of GRE, or the average experience, or the average age of the incoming candidates, or how many international candidates they were taking in. So all of this information is available in the class statistics reports which every B school publishes. So I picked those reports up. I tried to understand where do I fit in, and if my experience and my knowledge, skills, capabilities will not just benefit me, but at the same time the peers that I'll be working with. And my GRE score was also something I took into consideration. I ensured that I have at least 6 to 7 points above the average GRE score, because Indian applicants as such are overrepresented in any of the abroad business schools. And from that perspective, it is extremely important to understand if your choice will be realistic one. So I ensured that I have 6 to 7 points above the overall GRE score, but at the same time, I also ensured that I have at least 4 or 5 points above both of the sectional splits as well. So keeping those things in mind, I made a short listing of the schools. I also figured out that which one might be a little bit tougher to break into. So I kept those for the round one, because in round one you generally have a lot more seats or slots open up. So you have a lot more opportunity to explore things. So I kept a tougher school for round one, and a bit and schools which are a bit easier to get into for round two as such. So that is how I went about deciding. And I mean, as an analytics professional, I picked up an Excel. I started deciding which schools will be, best one to go into, which one actually recruits into the school, into the companies which I want to go into. And I have an elaborate Excel which details all of these details. So from that, I created sort of a list that, okay, these are the 6 schools I want to apply in R1. These are the 6 schools I want to apply in R2. So
And what about the GRE preparation? Being a working professional, how did you manage the preparation for the GRE? And did you write it only once, or I think you wrote the GRE twice,
right, right.
right?
I wrote it
Oh,
twice.
yeah.
So being a working professional, I think things get a lot more tougher, because you have to manage a full-time job, and at the same time you need to prepare, analyze where your preparation is standing, and accordingly, customize or modulate your preparation accordingly. So it has been a long road for that as well. I think it took me around for the first attempt, I took around 4 to 5 months. It was more than average what average students take, because I needed to ensure that I'm getting a score which is decent enough to apply for the school. So the first time I took test, I got around 323. But I realized that maybe if I can make it a bit better, the chances will significantly improve. So I took it second time, and obviously, Shruti, you played a crucial role in that to pushing me that yeah, you should take up exam one more time, and ensuring that I took it and accordingly, set up the realistic goals as well. So, yeah, for the preparation aspect, I think it became more important to analyze where I stand. So, what I did was I took up a GRE official mock test, the first one, to understand my current footing. And accordingly, I realized that, okay, quants is something which all of the engineers are very well frequented with. Verbal is the one where you have to, pick up a little bit more of a pace and cram up those vocabulary with GRE so significantly demands. So that was one area where I, had to struggle a bit, because it has enormous, it requires enormous vocabulary. Even though I'm a reader, but it took me a while to, get hold of all those Victorian era words which they, utilize as a part of their testing methodology. So I ensured that I knew all the words. At least I knew the rough meaning of the words. I understood what are the synonyms, because that becomes extremely important in the sentence equivalence questions. And with that, I took up a couple of more mocks. I always analyzed the end report which I was receiving, that which areas I'm lacking into and how I can improvise upon those. So sectional analysis of essence, and while preparing for any standardized test.
When you're planning to apply, especially to the international schools for R1, what is a good timeline to get done with your GRE and then get started with your application? How many applications do you plan? simultaneously for R1. So how did you work that out?
So I think ideally, I mean, in a very ideal scenario, you should be done with your standardized tests by, I guess, February or March. I was not in that ideal situation because my scores were a bit lower. So I had to retake the test. So I took my test again in July. But at the same time, since I had already prepared for GRE once, it didn't take me as much of time, to prepare for it once again. I just needed to refine the things which I was lacking into. So while preparing for the GRE, I also started working on my applications because it requires a lot of introspection in terms of what you want to do, what are your goals, what are your stories, how your career, how throughout your career journey you have been able to create that impact. It might be into the small things which you might leave unnoticed, that you might find your actual story of how you were able to create or give back something to the society, or impact your colleagues or co-workers that you work with. So I think that is when I reached out to you and we started working on those aspects, like what kind of work I want to do, or what are the areas where I might be able to contribute into. So it's all about realizing the strengths of your profile, the weaknesses of your profile, and accordingly addressing those weaknesses to ensure you capture everything very holistically. And I think that requires a lot of time. So if you start, say, somewhere in April or May, that is when I started in May, working with you on my profile. And from May onwards, I think it's a sufficient time. You have around 4 months, 4 to 5 months to work on all your applications. And since Indian business schools require applications a bit earlier, I think IIM Ahmedabad requires it around in August, and ISB requires in September. However, international schools require it in October. So accordingly, you can prioritize one application over another. But at the same time, at the end of the day, your stories will be same. It will be the same thing which you will be presenting across all the applications. It's just you need to understand how you need to customize it, and that customization is of essence. So all of that requires a lot of time, and I think 4 to 5 months duration is sufficient for you to work sufficiently well on those applications.
You've already addressed a certain part of the essays in the previous question, but get taking it in a more detailed manner. What exactly goes into, or what do you think goes into making a strong application and the essays?
So, unpopular opinion, but unlike what most people want you to believe, that score is the only deciding factor for your application to be successful, I think whole profile is extremely important. It's not just the score. I myself think that despite being from a overrepresented demographic, I could have done worse. But with the results that I've received at the end of the day, I think the overall profile which I had, the kind of strengths I had, the way I was able to reflect those strengths in my stories, I think that played a very pivotal role in allowing me to get selected in the school I wanted to. So that is what you need to do. You need to understand that where your strengths lie. It requires a lot of introspection, as I've said again and again. You need to think back, you need to understand at which point of your career you were able to create that impact, or where you were there for your teammates to make that impact. And impact is what that matters. It's all about the leadership impact, or co-working impact, or inclusivity, diversity impact. Whatever you do, it's all about what the end result was, and if you were able to be the change maker that world wants. So I think that is where things matter the most. So yeah, to sum it up, I think you need to have that holistic profile rather than just the score.
Yeah. And you've interviewed with almost all the schools that you applied to. So, what was the interview experience like? India versus the schools abroad, or maybe individual schools. What stood out in the preparation?
So I think each interview was slightly different from others. Indian business school interviews were a little bit different from the international business school interviews, from the fact that the way we Indians think, it's entirely different from the way the international schools think, or the way they interact with the applicants. So just to give you an example, I was interviewing at IIM Ahmedabad, and they had like a rigorous interview. Like they pick out any random thing out of your profile, and they try to understand why you did that, what you did in that, and they will pull out anything. For example, I was interviewing with them, and they picked out a very random question for me, like what is the difference between analysis and analytics. I mean, we use these words on a very daily basis, but when it comes to mnemonics, or to understand the basic definition of these terms, it puts you on a very tight spot. to come up with the exact definition. So I think such questions are what you can always expect unexpected out of IIM Ahmedabad interviews. For international business schools, it's more in term of, sometimes you may have a blind interview where the interviewer may not have your entire profile or may not have gone through your essays. But in other cases, they might have gone through it, and you just need to guide them, understand their questions. So at the end of the day, in international school interviews, you can be 50% prepared with your stories, with your essays, whatever you have shared as a part of your application. And rest of the 50% is thinking on the spot, thinking on your feet, and always being ready and optimistic about what you're trying to share. And couple of pointers which we collaborated on the mock interviews as well. So some of the points which I picked up throughout our conversations was always format your answers in a star format. So all those things always come in handy. So yeah, that is where the different experience difference lies, and that is how you can actually make your interview experience worthwhile as well.
Any myths that were broken at the at the end of this whole process? Do you feel, are there any myths that have been broken? You thought differently, now you think differently about something?
Certainly the biggest one is the scores one. Like, scores are not the only thing that matter. A lot of things matter about your profile. Second thing is, uh, people think that the more number of applications you submit, the higher the chance is of getting into a business school. What I realized is, you need to make sure that which colleges you want to get into, you need to make that genuine connection with the college through different engagements that happen. International business school provide you ample opportunities to engage with the students and with their ad forms. So you need to make sure that you utilize all of those opportunities and make those interactions meaningful. And lastly, the last thing is that you need to ensure that you are always prepared, because you never know when the interview may land up. So sometimes people think that, yeah, it may take a lot of time before the interview may come in. So it can start as soon as just a week after you submit the application. It can come as late as just a couple of days before the decision final date. So always be ready. You never know what can happen at the end of the day.
Any do's and don'ts for people who are just embarking on this journey, trying?
Um, Always ensure that you have ample buffer time between each stage of the application. I know it's going to be a very long journey, from preparing for the standardized test to starting to work on your applications to finally making it. Sometimes it's a positive decision at the end of the process. Sometimes it's a negative decision. So always ensure that you have buffer time, and always ensure that you always have a plan B, because even if you don't land up in your dream school, there is no specific definition of a dream school. Dreams can change, and accordingly you need to ensure that all of the schools which can provide some aspect of your dream to come true, you need to ensure that they are in your target. So ensure that you give your 100% in all of those schools, and ensure that you prepare well for all of them. So I think that is the most effective part of any effective strategy. You need to ensure that quality is never compromised for the quantity.
What were the criteria important that were important for you while choosing an MBA admission consultant?
So I went through like a lot of consultants while decide finalizing which consultant should I work with. Most of them, they wanted me to be a bit more realistic about my choices, because as I said initially, I hadn't had a very good score. Many of them emphasized that I should retake couple of more attempts before I start embarking on the application journey. And I realized that I was at a phase where I don't want to delay any longer my MBA journey. I thought that I am ready to initiate or embark on the journey of MBA applications itself. I knew that I had strengths in my profile, and I wanted to leverage those strengths before it was a bit too late for me. So I throughout the interactions which I've had with the consultants, I tried to understand if they had that confidence which I had in myself. And if they reflected that confidence, I thought that I would just go with them. So when I interacted with you, Shruti, the first thing which you said was, we will work on it together and we'll get through it. And that is when I realized, okay, this is the kind of positive attitude that I want, while working and collaborating with someone. So that positive confidence actually became infatuating, and I worked on my applications, I worked on my essays, and again I took another attempt at GRE. And I think all of that paid out well, at the end of the day when I see the results. So it paid out well, and the kind of result I got into my dream school as well. So it was a good journey, and that is what I looked into consultant. So always ensure that you have someone whom you find that sense of trust when you start working with, because without the trust, without that compatibility, it's not going to be a easy journey for you. So yeah, and throughout the journey also I realized that should you are always available to assist me with any of my queries, be it random query about whether going to the business school would make sense, to any specific query about the business school program or anything else. So I think that whole thing made my experience extremely pleasant.